Stand Up.
Hi there, and welcome to the Friday episode of Stand Up, where I'll be joined by the great Tim Wise for another amazing conversation. Tim, now a senior fellow at the African American Policy Forum, where he has been very busy. I ask about his work there and so much more. You're not going to want to miss it. It begins at 20 minutes into today's show. And even though it's Friday and I hosted the Hangout for a couple hours last night for all paid subscribers, I still have your headlines and clips, news and clips, ladies and gentlemen, on a Friday for my friend Ryan G. Under the Sea. Quick thank you to all of the new subscribers who have signed up over the past few weeks. It's been pretty exciting to see several new people sign up and become part of our community, as well as supporting the work that we're doing here on what I call Earth One, where our reality is that science is evidence, climate change is real, Donald Trump lost the election in 2020, and we hope he'll lose again in November. Just a few of the kind of staples that we feel about Earth One. We don't agree on everything, not even close, but we are a loving, kind, generous, curious, thoughtful, amazing group of people, and I'm so happy to have you as a part of our community. So a special shout out and welcome to new subscriber Jeff G, who emailed me at standupwithpete@gmail.com, said, Pete, I've been a loyal listener since the POTUS days on SiriusXM, and I'm finally very happy to be a new subscriber. I apologize and that I've been a cheap bastard all this time, but it finally hit me how much I look forward to your show, and once that epiphany occurred, I knew that I had to be a subscriber. Wow, Jeff, thank you very much. Anybody else out there? I'm surprised that there are still folks out there that have been listening as long as that haven't subscribed yet, but I am not offended. It's a really great thing to hear and see, and I'm so happy to get your message, because Jeff went on and said that until last year when he retired, he would listen to podcasts all day long, most of which were political in nature. In retirement, I keep myself very busy. I actually don't have all that time to listen. So when I do have time, either working around the house or on longer drives, I make sure that Stand Up is always first on my list. And he goes on to say, I really love the news and sound bites, so please keep that as a standard part of the show. In fact, in regards to the sound bites, on the show where you interviewed Chad White, you played this clip of a Texas representative making the most forthright, honest, and very surprising assessment of the Christian nationalist movement, and it blew me away. But nowhere in any other media form did that speech garner any attention. So kudos for that. And it's just that type of information that I don't hear anywhere else that I look so forward to on your show. Your guests are the best because they are on so often. We get to know them and they begin to feel just like friends. Thanks so much for all that you do, and keep up the amazing work. Jeff, thank you so much for saying all that. It is really hits the spot, and you've captured what I'm trying to do, and it means so much to me. I am very grateful to have you listening and now subscribing. Hey, if you've been listening for a long time and haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. I've announced I'm going to be headed out on the road. Stand Up with Pete Dominick tries to turn out the vote, hoping to head to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, and I'm definitely going to be in Nevada on September 7th to 14th. If you're in or around Las Vegas, let me know. I'd love to connect and find out who I should be talking to in Nevada. What candidates, what voters, what initiatives should I be addressing, promoting, platforming, and learning more about? Maybe I'll just stand on the corner somewhere and hold up a sign. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to it, and the plan is coming together now. Can't do it without your support. If you're interested in donating more to help produce this independent coverage and activism to get out the vote, you could send that money to Venmo, Pete-Dominick, or you can upgrade your subscription temporarily. Also, I do have to announce that Patreon, which is the platform that I use for my paid subscriptions, has announced that the Apple Store is going to be taking a huge cut starting soon. So if you want me to get more of your money, that's the whole idea of Patreon, Substack, and these other payers, more pennies of your dollar and less of a cut giving to Patreon, much less the Apple Store. Sign up now, because Apple is requiring that Patreon use their in-app purchasing system and remove all other billing systems from the Patreon iOS app by November 2024. So starting in November, new memberships purchased will be subject to a 30% fee, and I may have to do something else, but you are locked in right now. So sign up now if you're already a Patreon subscriber. No worries at all, but join before November 2024 to support my work and have more of your money go to me and not Apple and Patreon. All right, let's get to those headlines, shall we? There are 82 days left before Election Day, and yesterday President Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris appeared together in Maryland for their first public event since President Biden ended his bid for re-election. They are there to celebrate and tout the results of a huge legislative accomplishment, landmark price negotiations that are expected to lower the cost of prescription drugs. This story is so important. The history of this issue is so important. How it got done is so important. I'm not sure exactly how to say what kind of a big effing deal this is. But of course, President Biden wants to cement his legacy. And so he talked about decades-long push to lower drug prices. But of course, there was no doubt that yesterday it was Kamala Harris who was the main attraction there in Maryland. I'll give you some audio from that event coming up. But the headline is, the U.S. unveils price limits for 10 costly or common medications. The Biden administration said it would have saved $6 billion had the new prices been in effect last year. The negotiated prices take effect 2026. They're expected to lead to direct out-of-pocket savings for millions of older Americans who take the drugs that are now subject to price negotiations. And so it's a big story yesterday, and I'll talk more about it with experts like Dr. Jon Carroll soon. All right, let's see. What else do you need to know from the last 24 hours? Tim Walz and J.D. Vance have agreed to debate each other on CBS on October 1st. Of course, I'll host a watch party for that, I'm sure. That should be amazing. The disgraced former president is trying to delay his criminal sentencing in Manhattan until after the election. I don't think it's going to happen. In New Jersey, the governor there selected his former chief of staff to finish the Senator Robert Menendez term, passing over Democratic nominee for Senate Andy Kim. This guy's name is George Helmy. He'll hold the seat until the election. The other big announcement from the Biden administration this week is that they are trying to make it easier for consumers to cancel subscriptions, speak to customer service agents, get flight refunds, and more, which is another huge effort. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the nation's largest business lobbying group, said the regulations would micromanage business practices and cost Americans more time and money. But who doesn't want to see this? What else? In March and April in the United States, wind energy beat coal for electricity generation, which is huge and awesome, amazing news. Love to hear that. Yet 6 California counties have seen about 40 to 60% of their land burned in a decade. Sweden reported the first case of Mpox, it's now being called, monkeypox, outside Africa, of the deadlier form of the virus. Mediators and Israeli negotiators met in Qatar for a high-stakes push to end the war in Gaza. Hamas, however, did not participate in these negotiations. 5 people were charged in the death of actor Matthew Perry for providing him the ketamine that causes death in October, and that's pretty terrible. MSNBC went live on that announcement yesterday from the press conference, which was, I thought, ridiculous, but still, that was a pretty big story yesterday. Ukraine said it had captured a Russian town now, and yet to be confirmed by independent media outlets. But if confirmed, it would be Ukraine's first capture of a Russian town since its incursion in Russian territory 10 days ago. Stocks headed for another winny week. Walmart is at a record high. And the most important headline from yesterday in my life is that I finally said goodbye to my 2012 Chevy Volt. It was tough to say goodbye, but she has finished her time with us, and she served me and my family well, and I'm so proud that in 2012 I tried to be the change I could see and bought one of the first plug-in hybrid electric vehicles available, got solar panels, and hopefully influenced others to do the same. Well, it was tough. It was tough to say goodbye yesterday. All right, those are your headlines and my headline, and now it's time to get to the sound I found for you. I'm going to start with something inspiring, really inspiring, thoughtful. Seriously, I loved this. This is Nick Cave. He is the lead singer and songwriter for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Grinderman. And he was on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert last night. I think it was last night, yeah. And he read this letter that he wrote a woman, and it's very, very inspiring. And I want to give you the full 2 minutes right now. It's about loss and tragedy. Nick Cave apparently lost both of his sons. I know nothing about this guy, but suffered the worst kind of personal tragedy anyone can possibly imagine, and yet he hasn't given up on humanity.
Okay, so the question, someone has written in, called Valerio from Stockholm, has written in saying, following the last few years, I'm feeling empty and more cynical than ever. I'm losing faith in other people, and I'm scared to pass these feelings on to my little son. Do you still believe in us, human beings? So this is the letter that I wrote. Dear Valerio, much of my early life was spent holding the world and the people in it in contempt. It was a position both seductive and indulgent. The truth is, I was young and had no idea what was coming down the line. It took a devastation to teach me the preciousness of life and the essential goodness of people. It took a devastation to reveal the precariousness of the world, of its very soul, and to understand that the world was crying out for help. It took a devastation to understand the idea of mortal value, and it took a devastation to find hope. Unlike cynicism, hopefulness is hard-earned, makes demands upon us, and can often feel like the most indefensible and lonely place on earth. Hopefulness is not a neutral position. It is adversarial. It is the warrior emotion that can lay waste to cynicism. Each redemptive or loving act, as small as you like, such as reading to your little boy, or showing him a thing you love, or singing him a song, or putting on his shoes, keeps the devil down in the hole. It says the world and its inhabitants have value and are worth defending. It says the world is worth believing in. In time, we come to find that this is so. Love, Nick.
All right. How about that? That really moved me, and hopefully you feel moved by it as well. Very, very cool. And hard to follow that with anything. So I'm going to go to CNN, where I will be on Friday night tonight, by the way. I'll be on the 10 o'clock hour with Abby Phillip. If you can always get bumped, but that's the plan right now. I'll be sitting on the same set and talking about important issues where this happened last night. This went viral last night, really crazy. Congresswoman Nancy Mace was there, and man, is she a racist. I would never want to sit down with Abby Phillip if I were her, but more importantly, I wouldn't want to sit across from Michael Eric Dyson and Keith Boykin. Listen to this minute and a half. It is a little bit of a crosstalk, but I think it's worth it.
Michael.
That sounds like self-hatred and justification of white supremacy. And let me just say this, because this Congresswoman is a wonderful human being, but when you disrespect Kamala Harris by saying you will call her whatever you want, I know you don't intend it to be that way. That's the history and legacy of white disregard for the humanity of black people.
Oh, so now you're calling me a racist.
I didn't say. I just said you weren't a racist.
That is complete.
No, you don't have to intend racism to accomplish
you are intending that I am
your disrespect
racist,
of Kamala Harris is part and parcel of a tradition of disrespect.
It's offensive,
Congresswoman.
Why can't you just? I'm
not calling you a racist. I'm telling you what the practice is.
You are. You absolutely are.
Let me get
No, what's disgusting is your disrespect of her.
Professor.
This gentleman said, I didn't know her name. He's trying to do it.
Is her disrespect of women. She doesn't know what a woman is. And if 25 years ago,
white women don't have the ability to tell black women who paid the price of blood to make this country what it is, to tell them they're not real women.
25 years ago, I became the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. I fought my way through it.
So pronounce her name right.
Let me actually
pronounce her name right.
Kamala Harris. If
Kamala.
You said it was
Nancy.
It's Kamala. You're doing this on purpose, Congresswoman.
That's disrespectful.
You can't expect people.
And it went on like that and got even worse, and maybe I shouldn't have played it because there was too much crosstalk, but I thought that was, last night, a fascinating conversation to see, to witness, and wanted to share it with you right now. I hope you'll watch me tonight on CNN with Abby Phillip at 10 East. All right, let's head over to Fox News. I thought this was interesting because Dana Perino, who used to work at the Bush administration, spoke with the former campaign manager of the Obama campaign. His name is Jim Messina yesterday about the latest polling on the Trump-Harris race and the issue which appears to be top of mind for voters, women's reproductive rights. Here is that conversation, or 2 minutes from it.
Turnout in November, a new survey does show a majority of Democrat, Republican, and independent women all oppose the decision to send the issue back to the states. Jim Messina, former Obama campaign manager, is here, and I want to talk about so many things with you, but I did want to start with this because I remember a couple of years ago, you had said that this is going to be an issue, but will be an issue on the ballot in some of the battleground states, and in fact, it is going to be. I also noted that there was a pollster who recently said he looked to do a focus group with independent-minded, undecided women voters, and he couldn't find any. And even though the economy is the number one issue across the board, how will the issue of abortion affect the election? What should Republicans be aware of?
Yeah, Dana, this is the sleeper issue of this election, and it was a sleeper issue of the last election. In the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats performed 9% better than the polls, and when you look at why, the huge move towards the Democrats from suburban women. You know, the theory of my entire life has been don't piss women off. And this issue has pissed off a whole lot of women voters in these battleground states. And now they're going to get a chance to vote on it. And you see this in poll after poll. I totally agree with you. The economy is the most important issue. But when you go down and look at issues that are moving enthusiasm, it is this abortion issue. And it's because across party, Republicans, Democrats, Independents all believe in the same thing. They want the government to stay out of their lives. And this is an issue that is just burning straight hot. And President Trump seems to be trying to run away from his position on this. And I think it's really hard to do.
All right. That's Jim Messina yesterday on Fox News, making a very important point that I've been trying to make every single time I talk about the issue that is most important or most important issues during and for this upcoming election. Never piss off women. Well, all right. There you go. Jim Messina. And now let's go to President Biden. Yesterday at that Maryland rally where he talked about the cuts in Medicare prescription drugs that they negotiated and have accomplished.
By the way, this guy we're running against, when he was president, he gave a $2 trillion tax cut to super wealthy. You know what that was? He generated the largest deficit any president has in American history. I love these Republicans talking about cutting spending. You know, we have 1,000 billionaires in America. You know what their average tax they pay is? 8.2%. Introduced a bill to say that you got to pay a minimum of 25%. You know what that would raise? $500 billion over the next 10 years. Imagine what we could do with that. Imagine the taxes we could cut for ordinary people. Well, look, Kamala and I have a better idea. We're going to protect Medicare and Social Security and make sure the wealthy pay their fair share. That's how we're going to pay for it.
Used by Kamala Harris, and there was an amazing reception for him. They chanted his name. He got a huge ovation. But now let's listen to Kamala Harris in her own words at the same rally yesterday.
Leaders in our nation have done more on so many issues, including to expand access to affordable health care than Joe Biden. And today we take the next step, thank you, Joe, forward in our fight.
All right, there it is yesterday from Maryland. And I also love this with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz put out a video of them sitting down and just talking and getting to know each other. It's a real smart video that they released yesterday, and I just got to play this a little bit of it for you.
Like I have white guy tacos and
what is
like
that?
black,
like mayonnaise and tuna? What are you doing?
pretty much ground beef and cheese.
That's okay. Do you put any flavor in it?
No.
Oh.
Here's the deal. No, they said to be careful and let her know this, that black pepper is the top of the spice level in Minnesota, you know.
I'm the first vice president, I believe, who has ever grown chili peppers.
I'm trying to expand my food knowledge.
You know what? We've got some cantaloupes. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Like I have white
I
guy
love
tacos.
it. I love it when she says, "Oh."
What is that? Like that's okay. Do you put any flavor in it?
No. Here's the deal.
Oh. Oh, man. If I had a dime for every time I've been Tim Walz and Karen Madison has said that to me or any number of other black folks or just people. It doesn't have to be black folks. Yeah, it's very, very funny. A lot of white people cook very, very good and use spices, but not Tim Walz or me. So I like that. Thought that was really fun. And that is your headlines and clips. News and clips, ladies and gentlemen. That's a laugh to end on before we get to my conversation with Tim Wise. And today's show is brought to you by you. Remember, I can't do news and clips or these great interviews, original content every day without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. All right. Well, let's get to Tim Wise right now. He's a senior fellow now at the African American Policy Forum. He's an anti-racist writer and speaker who's written over 10 books. He is one of my favorite people to talk to. I always learn a lot from him, and in pretty much every interview and every conversation or every speech I watch of him giving, I kind of want to stand up and cheer, which is no exception today for pretty much this entire conversation. Follow Tim on Twitter, where he's prolific. Read all of his writing. And let's do it right now with one of our favorites. Tim Wise is my guest on today's show. Let's do it. Back with one of my all-time favorite people to talk to, listen to, read. Of course, I actually just gave out your most recent book, Dispatches from the Race War, which is a collection of many of your essays. Boy, does that all still hold up, and it's more relevant than ever before. How are you? Thank you for joining me, Tim Wise.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
You've been busy. You're now working at the African American Policy Forum, which is started by your friend Kimberly Crenshaw. Tell me about your new job as the senior fellow there. That's pretty awesome position for you, and they're really lucky to have you. I think they.
Well, I hope they feel that way. It's just weird for me to have a job of any kind. I've for 30 plus years, I've been on the road lecturing and doing my own thing, and I have to say it's really nice to work with others. In a community or, in an organization that feels like a community, feels like a family, doing incredible work from a Black feminist perspective, because this is an organization that is principally, certainly led by and principally staffed by folks that are committed to not only an anti-racist framework, but an intersectional framework that brings feminism and anti-racism together in a way that I think too often anti-racism work doesn't do and feminism work doesn't do. It's easy to silo yourself in one or the other. And, Kim Crenshaw, obviously, and the folks that have worked with her for years understand the need of dovetailing those things and showing the connections between them. So it's a real honor to be able to work with her, both from a researching perspective, presentation perspective, advocacy perspective. It's very exciting. So it's a huge honor.
You have been no stranger to all these ideas and initiatives, and have been talking about them, writing about them for years, and having you in that organization and at these events that you've been having is really great, because you are one of the most woke. And the reason I say it that way is because you have never run away from terms like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've written about them, you've taught, and the same thing with critical race theory. What do you say to those of us who think we might need to rebrand because we're just reacting to the way that they've demonized those at my school board meetings, and obviously in public policy? It's become part of their real platform is to be anti-woke, and we sometimes need to try to understand what they mean by that. You are not running away from these. Why not?
Well, and my guess is in part my relationship to the African American Policy Forum is that I think I am officially the white person whisperer for all of these ideas that the forum has been advocating for a long time, right? Because the reality is, look, sometimes, as we all know, unfortunately, our people will not listen to brilliant analysis when it's coming from Black women. It won't listen. And so if I can assist in that regard and break down what CRT is and what DEI is and what intersectionality is for people who normally don't don't hear about it, or who respond negatively to those who created these concepts, then all the better. Look, DEI is just what we call what used to be equal opportunity. I mean, it started out in the 1960s with fair employment practices. It becomes later on EEO, equal employment opportunity. It becomes affirmative action, and then it becomes DEI. And at every stage, by the way, not just recently, but at every stage, there's been this reactionary backlash. It's not as if conservatives liked fair employment practice or EEO. It's not like they appreciated any of the progress that's been made over the course of generations and decades now. These are folks who oppose Brown v. Board. One of the reasons that the school choice movement began, let's recall, is that Milton Friedman writes a piece in 1955 calling for vouchers. Why 1955? Well, because in 1954, the Brown decision had been handed down and white folks could no longer maintain segregated whites-only schools. So at every single point, racism and white supremacy have shape-shifted to accommodate power and to maintain power. That is one of the fundamental insights of critical race theory. CRT is premised on the idea that in spite of very significant reforms and important victories, racism has a way of shape-shifting like a transformer, right? And taking on a different embodiment, but never really fully going away. When you have a system that was created for the purpose of maintaining white domination, the idea that suddenly the people who've benefited from that are going to go, all right, enough of that. That was silly. We should have stopped that a long time ago. That's just not going to happen. There's been no great moral movement toward the elimination of systemic racism. What there has been is a papering over of systemic racism. What has happened is the weaponization of colorblindness, by which I mean we're just going to not pay attention to color. We're going to use colorblindness, not noticing race, or as Project 2025 tries to lay out, not even counting race, not even classifying, not keeping track of data. Why would they be arguing for the elimination of data collection when it comes to race? Well, it's obvious. If you see the disparity, somebody might want to fix the disparity.
Yes.
Or better in their mind to essentially see no evil, hear about no evil, and thereby remedy no evil. That is what CRT predicts would happen. And so at every turn of American history, this thing that's under attack as being this poisonous concept that besmirches the good name of America, it is simply a concept that reflects what America has done and continues to do. And it's important for us to adopt a framework which allows our young people and our not so young people to understand what they are seeing. If you don't understand systemic racism, if you don't understand the ways in which this country was created and the purposes for which it was created, it becomes impossible to understand what you're observing, except to blame black people or to blame brown folks, to blame those on the bottom for being there. That's what the right wants to do, and we have to stand up and push back against that.
Yeah, and you've been doing that forever, and you've cataloged it so well for us. I had no idea that Milton Friedman submitted the idea of vouchers back in 1955, and obviously it's always been this attack on public education. I'm dealing with it right now, as I always am in my district, and it's been going on across this country for a really, really long time. So what did you learn, or what was the conversation like with Kimberly Crenshaw and these other scholars talking about intersectionality of specifically of race and gender, black women, because you've got a candidate on the top of the ticket who's a black woman? How much of a conversation has that been? I'd love to know what they're saying.
Well, we've been doing some really wonderful events just in the last few days on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. We, of course, had Critical Race Theory Summer School a couple weeks ago in Nashville. But that was, really, I think we started, before Joe Biden had actually stepped aside. Now, all the days are sort of running into my mind, so I can't recall for sure. But most recently at these events on the Vineyard, we had an amazing panel the other day, and folks can find information about that. And I believe, if not already, soon we'll be able to find video clips at the AA Policy Forum, which is the Instagram for African American Policy Forum, and also at their Twitter, same thing, AA Policy Forum. We had an incredible conversation about the way that black women in particular are doubly marginalized by the combination of racism and white supremacy on the one hand and patriarchy and misogyny on the other. And there are lots of examples. The attack on Kamala Harris, obviously, is both a race and gendered attack. It is not just one thing. It is both things, right? When she is talked about as, there are stickers that have been popping up that say before before she was even the nominee that said, Joe and the hoe gotta go, right? Because that's the kind of language that they use, which is clearly gendered. Then the DEI moniker, which is being applied to her, is quite obviously both a race and gendered thing. The idea that she's only in the position she's in because she is a woman of color. Right. We, of course, not only have the attacks on Kamala Harris, we have the disproportionate killing of black women by police. Now, we all know the history of the disproportionate killing of black men and Latinx men and indigenous men, but especially black men. What we don't often as readily discuss is the disproportionate way in which black women relative to white women and black women relative to the population in general are attacked violently by police, even when they are largely unarmed. And so we're talking about, about a third of all black folks who were killed by police are women. Most folks don't know their names. One of the things that the African American Policy Forum has been pushing for the last decade now, largely out of the public realization, because it just doesn't penetrate the media, is the Say Her Name campaign. Yeah. The idea that we need to hold these women up to talk about their stories. And the most recent case, of course, was Sonia Massey outside of Springfield, Illinois. One of the most egregious, horrific cases. At CRT Summer School, we had Ben Crump, who is the Massey family attorney, come on and actually describe in visceral detail what this officer did to this woman, shooting at a downward trajectory after she had already gone to her knees, afraid that she was going to be shot, after the officer said, I'm going to shoot you in the effing face. And all she had done was, she said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And that was after he told her to go take a pot of boiling water off the stove. She wasn't swinging the pot at him. She wasn't about to throw the water on him, but he said something to her that was aggressive. She said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And then he said, no, you effing will not. I will shoot you in the effing face. She then tries to put up her hands and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He shoots her. And at first they tried to tell the family that this woman had committed suicide. We need to not only talk about this case, but all of these other cases where black women are criminalized just as black men are, where they are treated as just as disposable as black men are. And the reason we don't do it, that's not to take away from the disproportionality at which black men are being brutalized, but it is to say that the reason we don't do that is because we sometimes think about racism as only the thing that affects men. We don't recognize the combination of racism and misogyny, or misogynoir as it is more broadly known now, or increasingly known, because it's too much for our brains. We like to silo these things away. It's either racism or it's sexism. But black women have borne the brunt of state violence ever since the days of enslavement. They have borne the brunt of individualized pathology, the pathologizing of black people. If you think about the pathologizing of black women as overly sexualized, if you look at the pathologizing of black women with the Moynihan Report in the 60s, which blamed black matriarchy for the problems of the black community, right? In every instance, or you think about the welfare reform debates of the 90s, where black women were blamed for literally breeding a new generation of dependent black male criminals, right? In every instance, it's not just the black men who are being pathologized and attacked. It's the black women who are blamed for creating those black men, right? For literally birthing those black men. And so we have to have an approach to dealing with racism that takes account of misogyny, and an approach to dealing with misogyny that takes account of racism. You can't do one or the other. You have to do both.
Oh, so important. Really enlightening as well. Misogynoir. I've never heard that. It's the first.
Yeah, and if you go to and you look at African American Policy Forum materials, you can learn about the history of that word, the trajectory of the concept, where it comes from, and why it's so important that we hold that up in the current moment. Because at this point, I think oftentimes, white feminists, and this has always been a conflict between white feminists and black feminists, right? The idea that for white feminism, feminism has been typified as a white woman's movement, so much so that a lot of people, including non-white people, think of feminism as a white person's thing, right? Whereas you've had black women at the forefront of most of the cutting edge radical feminist thought, not even radical feminism. I mean, pretty mainstream, even before what we call radical feminism, at the forefront of that going back generations. And yet that is left out of the conversation. And likewise, when we talk about race, even you talk about the civil rights struggle, you talk about the history of civil rights leaders. Who were the names that we know? We might know Rosa Parks, of course, but we mostly know about the men who led this movement, and women were largely subordinated in our history textbooks to the way that we learn about who did and did not lead that struggle. But there's always been a disproportionate role for women, both as the targets of racism and as those who have stood up against it. And there are very few organizations that try to make that connection, very few scholars that are doing it the way they ought to. And Kim and the folks at AAPF are among those who have said, enough of that. Yeah.
I'm really glad we talked about their work and your work with them, because everybody should follow. I'll link to AAPF, all the links in today's show notes. I hope everybody listening will go follow them and see the work they're doing. I've learned so much just listening to you talk about it today, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of those panels and learning more. All right, one lowbrow question, yet still I'm sure you'll give a thoughtful answer, but I just got to get your take on it. Yesterday I had brilliant comedian Jay Alcovan on. He's become one of my favorite commentators. He's hilarious. He's the best Trump impersonator. And he made this really, interesting and somewhat obvious point, but I wanted you to jump out of it, that Trump is glitching out, that he's losing to a black woman. It's so obvious. He can't believe it. He can't accept it. He can't even accept that he's running against her. He still wants it to be Joe Biden. He can't accept her crowd sizes. He can't accept the polling. He can't accept losing. He's glitching. I wanted you to just give your pithy yet thoughtful remarks about if you thought there was some truth to that. Obviously, we're psychoanalyzing him, and who knows, but it would seem pretty obvious that's playing out.
Yeah, I think Kamala Harris has rendered him sort of the functional equivalent of an old Atari video game, that just sort of, it does in fact glitch out, or it freezes up and you're like, shit, I've got to start this game over again. I got to pull the cassette out and maybe I'll unplug it, reboot the whole system. He's trying to.
He is trying. He's replacing his candidate. I mean, to stay with the metaphor, he is trying to do whatever he can.
Yeah, well, he is. He's getting the band back together. Corey Lewandowski and all these guys are going to come back. Roger Stone, who's like a vampire, he never goes away. They're all going to come back. But he is clearly having an existential crisis at the thought that either a woman or a person of color, let alone both. Again, this gets into the whole point that I was just making with misogynoir, which, by the way, as a term was coined by Moya Bailey, and I should point that out and give credit where it's due. This is the combination of racism and sexism that is at the core of who Donald Trump is, and the core of who he has always been. Right, the idea that a person of color could get the best of him is bad enough in his mind. The idea that a woman could get the best of him is bad enough in his mind. But the idea that a woman of color who, in Donald Trump's imagination has just become black, has gotten the best of him and has gotten under his skin has got to be incredibly grating for him, because he does view himself as superior to both. And he clearly has made statements throughout the years that he considers white people to be superior. He's certainly made statements that he believes that superiority is handed down genetically and he's got quote unquote good genes, right? He's obviously, in the way he's treated women all throughout his life, we understand how he views women. So this is a woman he cannot control. It is a woman that he cannot, she's not scared of him, and I think that's what drives him up a wall.
He said one of his speeches, and it should be played over and over, especially a woman. He can't lose to especially a woman. I mean, his racism is sometimes overshadowed by his sexism and his misogyny. I mean, it's both so terrible, but he can't lose to a woman. Well, on the flip side, and let's take a look at what we're hearing, the word joy used a lot. Tim Walz, what do you make of this white man, this Midwestern avuncular white man who's a teacher for 20 years in the National Guard and so on, working for and proudly praising the black woman? What do we see being modeled there, that he is answering to her and he's doing it with tremendous happiness, joy, purpose, contentment? He likes being on the ticket with her. He likes being beneath, having his name under her name. He has no problem with that. What are we seeing being modeled here? Why does it matter?
Well, what we're seeing being modeled is healthy manhood. Right. What we're seeing being modeled is healthy whiteness. And what I mean by that, and it's hard for me to say the words healthy and whiteness together, because I understand the history of whiteness as a concept is entirely unhealthy and toxic. That's not to say people of European descent are inherently toxic or unhealthy, but whiteness, right, as a concept, we've talked about it many times, doesn't have a lot of redeeming qualities because it was created for the purpose of maintaining a system of oppression. But what he is doing is he is showing that there's a different way to live in this skin, right, which is a healthier way of being white in the world, and that there's a healthier way of being a man. Look, Tim Walz is certainly every bit, and I'm not into the whole alpha male archetype anyway, but he's more of an alpha than Donald Trump, for God's sake.
Oh yeah,
There's
I mean, the guy
alpha about Donald Trump. Just because you're loud and arrogant doesn't make you an alpha. What Tim Walz does is he is someone who is capable of leading. He has led before as a football coach. He is leading as a governor. He can be a leader, but he can also be a team player. That's what he is being in this instance. He is more than willing to follow the lead of a woman, and in this particular case, a woman of color. That is a healthy form of masculinity. This man is not uncomfortable in his maleness. He is not uncomfortable in his whiteness. He's not apologizing for either of them. He's not some simpering guy who's like, I'm so sorry that I'm a man, beat me over the head, or I'm so sorry that I'm white, which, by the way, none of us in the anti-racism movement have asked any white person to say that. That's the caricature that is offered of those of us who are anti-racist. Yeah. But he is someone who was saying one can be a guy's guy. He's a guy's guy in ways that like make me uncomfortable because I'm not used to guy's guy. Like you've seen all the memes. He'd change your tire, he'd make you a sandwich if you were hungry on a cold day. He'd bring you a glass of milk, whatever. I mean, there's so many amazing examples out there of the things that this guy would do that are just average, everyday Joe kind of things, right? Average things that guys do, I guess. And so that is a far healthier masculinity than what we see on the other side, not only with Donald Trump, but with J.D. Vance, right? Whose sense of his manhood is directly dependent on denigrating women. His sense of manhood is the flip side of how he views women, not only in general, but his own, this thing he said yesterday about his mother-in-law, or in this recent podcast interview with Eric Weinstein, where he says, talking about his mother-in-law quit her job. She's a biologist or something, quits her job to help take care of the child.
She took a sabbatical for a year, which may or may not be paid, we should mention. And I played that whole, I played about 2.5 minutes of it in yesterday's episode, but go ahead, please.
Yeah. So she takes sabbatical to come and help her daughter and now son-in-law, J.D. Vance, with the newborn, which is, it's a very self-sacrificing thing. It's a beautiful story. But the question is, if it had been J.D. Vance's father-in-law who had done that, would he have found that to be, oh my gosh, that's amazing. What a great man. He's a nurturer. He came to help us with the baby. No, because in J.D. Vance's mind, that would make him a cuck, right? In J.D. Vance's mind, that would make him not really a man, but a woman doing that is fine. And then Eric Weinstein says, oh, well, that's the whole purpose of a postmenopausal woman. And J.D. Vance goes, yeah, right, exactly. Like the whole point of being a postmenopausal woman, now that you can't make children anymore, the only thing you can do is help other people with their children. That is the kind of deep-seated misogyny that the right manifests every day. And Tim Walz is here to say that's not the only thing about being a man. You don't have to be like that. And the opposite of that is not the self-loathing, apologetic, guy that's like, oh, I hate sports and I hate the outdoors and I just want to sit in a corner and I don't know, everything I do is emo or whatever. Like, you don't have to, like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. If you want to sit in the corner and be emo, you can do, but I'm just saying, like, the idea that there's two kinds of manhood, that it's either Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, or it's that. Right. Tim Walz is saying, no, there's a whole different way to be a guy. And I think that's one of the reasons that people, interestingly, who are pretty progressive and people who aren't that progressive both like the same guy. Right. Because what other candidate could the Democrats possibly put on that ticket who would get both Joe Manchin and AOC to go, oh, that's a pretty good pick. That tells you something, I think.
Yeah, no, I think the wide spectrum of people who approve of him, from the far left to moderates and even a lot of Republicans, is a very, very important point. And you made a lot of good points about him being on the ticket with the black woman, which is fascinating and important. Let's go to the latest in Christian nationalism with our friend Mike Seaver. I loved Growing Pains growing up.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. I thought it was a great show. And it's really upsetting to me that Kirk Cameron turned into one of the leading Christian nationalists in the country. And I wanted to play this 30 seconds of him talking to somebody. As you know, I'm very active in public schools locally and around the country with teachers unions. And so I'm fighting against guys like this my whole career who have wanted to destroy public education and turn it into some weird form of Jesus factory. Here is Kirk Cameron, and I want to get Tim Wise's reaction on the other side.
If we outsource our parenting because it's easier, or we believe the lie that we're not qualified experts to educate our kids, so we have to subcontract our parenting and discipleship out to the government, we're going to have little kids that come back as little Marxists, little statists, little atheists, drag queens, strippers, drug dealers, and you name it. Pull your kids out of the schools that are teaching your kids bad things and put them into places that teach them good things.
First of all, that's not a choice for almost anybody in the country, even if they believed everything he said and you wanted to homeschool your kids. You can't do that and pay your mortgage. And so we could start there with how ridiculous of a binary he's trying to create for people. But go ahead. What did you hear? Your first reaction? Because I have plenty of questions about his archetype.
Well, I mean, first of all, I guess being an absurd Christian nationalist is a decent paying gig when you can't get work as an actor anymore.
I dare you.
So, I guess that's the next thing, right? I'll just do that. But this is a guy who by saying that ignores a couple of really important things, right? The reality is 90% of the people in this country, children in this country, go to public schools, 85 to 90%. In some places, quite a bit higher than that. So upwards of 9 out of 10 kids go to public schools. I'm fairly confident that nowhere near that percentage are coming out both Marxist and drug dealers and strippers and drag queens and statist and atheist or any combination of those things. So what he's just done is essentially condemn the vast majority of parents in this country, including, by the way, the majority of Christian parents, because the majority of Christian parents don't homeschool. The majority of Christian parents don't send their children to right-wing, Jesus academies. The majority of Christian parents, who I assume love their children just like the non-Christian parents and care about their kids, send their kids to public school. In fact, right now, there's a huge uproar and outrage in a lot of small rural communities in my state of Tennessee and around the country on the part of parents who are actually upset about the whole voucher and school choice thing and being able to send your kid to a private school with public money, because they say, listen, we don't even have any private schools out here and we like our public school and we don't want you to take our tax money and subsidize the big city conservative rich people to send their kid to some private academy. We don't even have those. So he's not just besmirch. I know he thinks he's just criticizing, East Coast liberals, West Coast liberals, and everybody in between is, just sort of in a constant state of excitement over the Lord. But the reality is the vast majority of parents are sending their kids to the same schools that he's condemning. Does that mean he believes they're not good parents, not good Christians? I mean, it just is. It's amazing how these people insult their own every single time they open their mouths. When J.D. Vance talks about women, he speaks as if no women are in the Republican coalition. Right? So weird. When Kirk Cameron condemns parents that send their kids to public school, he speaks as if all you need is 10% of the people in this country in order to have a successful political movement. And not even the full 10%, because the 10% that send their kids to private school are not all like Kirk Cameron, for God's sake. In fact, the vast majority of them are not. I mean, so this is somewhat, his analysis is about as sophisticated as Mike Seaver's analysis would have been on that show. And I remind you, Mike Seaver was not a bright kid on the show. He was not known as being bright. And so Kirk Cameron was clearly playing to type, and I guess we just don't make shows like that anymore, and that's why I can't get work.
I draw the line at criticizing Mike Seaver. I really identified with him. He was smart because he was a wise ass. He got away with stuff. That was just like me. And, so he wasn't academic, Tim. Not all of us are,
I know. But he always struck me as someone who wasn't going to look anything up, and if he just, all he's got to do now, he's got a Google machine, I assume they've got a Jesus version of Google, I'm sure. And he could look it up and he could find out that, oh shit, I just insulted 9 out of 10 Christian parents. Probably I should shut up.
Do you remember what his best friend on the show's name was?
I can't remember.
Boner.
That's right. God, there's so many things I could say, but you're the comic, so I'm gonna let you say it.
Well, I just want to meet the writers, how they they tossed around that name, and somebody's like, "Yeah, let's go with it."
Maybe they were trolling him. He was always that guy. I mean, maybe they were trolling him at the time and just trying to see if he would say boner over and over again every week.
You know, Tim, I was also thinking about, when it comes to the policies from Project 2025 to these Christian nationalist policies to some of these conservative ideas that are so outside the mainstream. And the reason why people think so many Americans believe them is because, a lot of Americans voted for Donald Trump, or they're presented in right-wing media in such a dominant way, Fox News to say alone, much less the YouTube and podcasts and so much more, Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and all those. But the truth is, whether it become the gun policy or women's reproductive rights, these are still really minority ideas. They seem like more people believe them because of how many Republicans there are in office. Some of that's to do with gerrymandering, obviously the Electoral College when it comes to the president. But these are still mainstream ideas. And my specific question is, when Tim Walz is considered a progressive, or even Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Barack Obama, who they called a Marxist and a communist over and over, versus the policies that they support, my point, getting to it, is most people support these policies, like free lunch, like Tim Walz. Explain how there's such a disconnect still, and why so many people on the right are so completely out of touch, and why they're going to keep losing in a lot of important elections. Not all.
Well, I think in part it's because particularly with the evangelical right, they have created for themselves, and that's a huge base of the Republican Party, the white evangelical right, I should say, huge base. They obviously have siloed themselves off from the broader world as much as they can, because they find the broader world to be corrupting, right? And so they don't try to sort of get to know people who don't think like them. Now, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I didn't have any choice but to get to know evangelical Christians, because they were going to surely get to know me whether I wanted them to or not. So as a Jew and as someone who was essentially secular, as most Reform Jews in the country at the time and probably now even still are, I didn't have any choice. I could not cloister myself away from their stuff, but they could very easily cloister from mine. And so to them, they did not understand. I mean, when Barack Obama won, you mentioned that. These are folks who did not think it was conceivable that was possible, and not for the reason that some of us did, which is, no, America's too racist, I'll never do that. No, they just thought, no, because most Americans don't think like that. Most Americans think like us. They really fundamentally believe that, even though, as you said, if you go down the list of actual policy beliefs, not the labels, because you can toxify a label, whether it's liberal, whether it's progressive, whether it's radical, whether it's CRT, DEI, affirmative action. You can always take a label and demonize and toxify. But if you just go down the policies, you will find overwhelming support for at least the broad brush contours of progressive ideas. Now, when you drill down into the specifics, does everybody stay on the left and progressive? No, I'm not foolish enough to believe that. I don't buy the idea that Michael Moore sometimes says, which is America's filled with progressives. No, well, not really. But at least in the broad brush contours, yes, when you start talking about making sure that children have full bellies so they can learn, making sure that everyone has real equal opportunity to compete in the workforce, making sure that we have common sense gun control and climate policy to deal with the ridiculous
tax policy, taxing wealthier people a lot more than working folks.
Right. The overwhelming majority of people endorse those things. But if you are on the far right, and particularly a far right that is so culturally oppositional to what they view as the dominant culture, you create a silo for yourself. And the left has versions of this. I'm not saying that we don't ever do it, but the right absolutely is rooted in that, right? So when you leave white flight, you leave the city to get away from certain people, then you leave the suburbs to go even further out, then you try to cloister yourself in your little church family, then you're basically only wanting to identify with people like yourself. And after a while, you start to believe that everybody, in fact, does think like you. And that's one of the reasons that when you then lose an election, the only thing you can assume is they must have stolen it. It had to have been stolen. There had to be fraud. How in the world? I have my best friend, his wife, who's also a dear friend, talks about her grandfather who passed several years ago, and her granddad was a staunch Republican from East Tennessee, and he was stunned when Barack Obama won because, as he explained it, he didn't know anybody who'd voted for him except for maybe one guy he knew from Brooklyn. He said. Knew one guy from Brooklyn, and that guy might have done it. But these other people, I don't know anybody who voted for him, so how could it be possible? Whereas those of us who are on the left, I don't think there's ever been an election that a Republican won that I was all that surprised, because I know plenty of people who vote that way. I run into them all the time. I interact with them whether I want to or not all the time. So I'm usually not shocked. I might be upset. I might be disappointed. I might be a little bit surprised at the margins or when certain things happen, but it's never outside the realm of the possible. But for these folks, the idea that someone who they consider to be on the left or that a person of color or that a woman of any color, let alone a woman of color, could win is unthinkable. And that's one of the things that makes this moment so dangerous, because if and when Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win in November, there are going to be millions of people in these Kirk Cameron-like silos, these MAGA silos, who are going to assume that there isn't any possible way that would happen. You heard Trump say the other day, he thinks that his base is, what did he say, 70%, 80% of the country, some outrageous number. He actually believes that everyone thinks like him except for a handful of drag queens and George Floyd protesters. And everybody else he assumes is on his side.
So well said, as was everything else. Well, I don't know what else I wanted to ask you. I just really know I wanted to talk to you today and get your take on all those things. Anything else that you wanted to mention that you're paying attention to, Tim?
Oh, I'm sure I could come up with something, but
any Olympics reaction?
No, I think the big thing for me about the Olympics, in addition to the absurdly and horrifyingly transphobic attacks on the boxer from Algeria, just unbelievable, and false and defamatory and endangering to her, because back in Algeria, that's not going to go over well if people start to believe that this is someone who's actually trans when she is not. But the thing that I think is so disturbing, I have no doubt that there are MAGA folks out there who were rooting against people like Simone Biles, who were rooting against the women's basketball team, who were rooting against possibly even the men's basketball team, because these are people who are deeply resentful of Black and brown women who are disproportionately rising to the top of their, I know, there's some white dude out there, and not just one, who's like, yeah, Simone Biles is okay, but she's no Mary Lou Retton.
No Carrie Strug.
Yeah, exactly. And the reality is it's true. She's not Carrie Strug. She's not Mary Lou Retton. She's a lot better than either of them. But it's the same people that came for Serena. Well, Serena Williams is good, but she's no whoever, And
you're not making this up. Let me just add, you're not making this up, and you didn't mention women's soccer team, but the reason why you're not making this up is because Trump, when he was president and they won, he insulted them while he was president. And furthermore, you don't see people congratulating them. I mean, I was super excited when the women's basketball and women's soccer teams won. I never say anything about sports, but I went on social media and I was like, this is awesome. I love this for a billion reasons, but those people weren't cheering for them. So I don't think you're making that up. There's many examples where they point to not rooting for them, or somehow, I guess DEI, they were DEI. That's how they got there, right?
Well, I mean, and Simone Biles' case, I mean, here's someone who has if any athlete has the right to be a little arrogant about her skill, it's her. I'm going to give it to her because she's that incredible. And yet, I mean, in normal life, she seems to be a perfectly humble and average person in that regard. But she was excited. And she made a point like, I love my black job, right, on Twitter. And that was, of course, a direct reference to what Trump had said. And there were people that attacked her, and not just because it was seen as a slap at Trump, but because they do not like black women who like themselves. They do not like black people who like themselves. They prefer black people who clearly dislike themselves and are primarily concerned about making white people comfortable. And so you're not going to make white people comfortable when you're on the women's basketball team for the United States, or you play in the WNBA. You're not going to make white people comfortable when you're Simone Biles and you're the greatest gymnast that this country's ever had. You're not there to cater to them. And when you've gotten used to the sort of hegemonic dominance of your own gaze, your own frame of reference, when someone says, I don't really care if you like me or not, I'm just going to come out here and beat everybody's ass, there's a degree to which you go, well, how can you be that arrogant? Well, when were white folks complaining about white arrogance when it was Joe Namath back in 1969 and 70? Joe Namath was the most arrogant jackass that's ever probably stepped on a football field. But Deion Sanders is arrogant, they say. Not Joe Namath. Deion Sanders is the problem. right? You can always find examples of that. You know, Muhammad Ali, how arrogant is he? Oh my God. We always point out the arrogance of the black athlete, but then we bring Hulk Hogan to the Republican convention to rip his shirt off as if, you know, that kind of arrogance, that kind of over the top thing is perfectly fine as long as you're a white guy. But if you're a person of color, and particularly a woman of color, you're supposed to, I don't know, you're supposed to be different. You're supposed to be demure. You're supposed to cater to the racial and gendered stereotypes about women of color that white folks have too often constructed in our own brains. And she destroys that, as Serena destroyed that, as black women have been pushing back against that narrative for generations. And white folks are just now hearing about it, and we're none too happy, clearly, as one can tell from the way that some people reacted to the Olympics.
By the way, yeah, the one athlete they got was Hulk Hogan, who ended his relationship with the WWE after a transcript of his racist tirade surfaced of him saying the N-word. That's the guy they then invited to come rip off his shirt. That guy. They couldn't get anybody else.
Yeah, so. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence that the two images, you had Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan, both of whom throw that word around with abandon. And both of whom represent a kind of masculinity, which, listen, I'm not, if that's your idea of a man, Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock, have at it. I cannot, you can't save them all. Some folks, you just gotta let some folks go. But if your idea of masculinity is literally anything but that, right, then maybe you ought to rethink your attachment to MAGA world.
Is there a professional wrestler you'd like to see come out and endorse and maybe even speak at the DNC, Tim? Would that
I don't know enough about professional wrestling. I would be ecstatic if any major professional wrestler did that. I think it would be absolutely hilarious. You know, but I mean, John Cena could do it. I think it would actually be quite funny if he did it, because you have somebody with that level of name recognition. It would be funny. But you know, I don't know. I would rather the Democrats actually not try to play that game. I would rather them not try to say, look, we've got someone from a made up sport. I mean, I'm not trying to take anything away from their athleticism, but it's all about the showmanship. It's a show. It is a performance, right? It takes a lot of skill to be able to pull it off. I'm certainly not trying to be disrespectful, but I think it is nothing if not telling that in the eyes of the Donald Trumps of the world, things like that are the spectacle that they want to hold up as being closest in order to their own spectacle. That's why Donald Trump loves going to wrestling matches. That's why Donald Trump loves to brag about being in the WWE Hall of Fame or whatever the hell. I don't even know if that's true. He claims it, or why he's so close to McMahon. I mean, you know, all of that is indicative of the carnival barker nature of Donald Trump, of Trumpism, of MAGA world, of the Republican Party, that they're going to bring two guys like Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan, both of whom Kid Rock is performing music, but not, you know, performing musical talent that he doesn't actually possess. He is faking it, as is Hulk Hogan when he was in the ring. So it's just a very interesting tell, I think, that you bring people who have far less in talent than they have in the ability to market themselves, right? And both Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock and Donald Trump are all examples of that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I will let you go. I really appreciate it. Great stuff as always, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tim Wise, everybody. Go get his books. Go follow him on Twitter. Let him know that you heard him here on the show. He is so gracious, and I am so grateful to him for joining me. It's always awesome. I hope you liked that. That is today's show. Jon Carroll was at the Hangout last night, along with his wife Meredith. Always great to see them and their beautiful hair. He sings us in. He does all the music. He sings us out. I'm so happy to have him as well. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will probably be talking to you tomorrow with Christian Finnegan or somebody else. We will see, and I'll be back here on Monday, of course, and the DNC at QED next Wednesday, or is it Thursday, the 22nd? Thursday, yeah, for the Hangout. It's going to be a really exciting week next week, the DNC in Chicago, and hopefully everything goes okay, and I will talk to you later. That's it. That's all. Bye-bye. Love you, bumblebees. Thank you.
You better stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be told up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.